I'd like to introduce Dr. Neil Capretto. He's our featured speaker of this afternoon. He has a long list of credentials, and he's the current director of the Gateway Rehabilitation Center. Dr. Capretto.
Thanks, Larry. It's very good to be here. I know you've had a long day. I'm scheduled to talk for about an hour and a half, and I know some of you have to leave, so I won't take it personally. I want to thank Father, first of all, for his remarks. I've been in this field. I'm an addiction psychiatrist. I started my training at St. Francis Hospital in Pittsburgh over 31 years ago. My mentor was Dr. Abram Tversky. He's a rabbi and a psychiatrist. He's written over 65 books. He's very spiritual, and he taught me early on that addiction and basically all illness are biopsychosocial spiritual conditions. We're not treating a virus in a computer. We're treating a very complex human being with a mind, body, and spirit. And the better able we do that, the better outcomes we get. And I also want to thank him because I have about 60, 70 slides, and he's graciously, the remote control doesn't work, so he's going to hit the button. If I had to walk back and forth, I'd wear my shoes out. So it's a privilege to be here today. I spend most of my time, I've been full-time at Gateway for going on 24 years. Like I said, I've been in the field of psychiatry and addiction treatment for over 31 years. And to me, still the most important thing I do is one-on-one working with a patient who's struggling, working with a family who's struggling. And for years, that's what I spent most of my time, and I still do. But I started seeing things that concerned me more and more, and a number of things. But I had one event about 11 years ago that made me decide I have to get out and start speaking about this. I work with adults and adolescents. I have kind of a spot in my heart for youth and young people. And I was working with a 16-year-old boy from Butler County named Billy. Billy was a great kid. He was active. He had won some scholastic awards. He had won an award for drafting. He'd been in sports. But he had an injury, and somebody next to him in a homeroom got him some Vicodin. It quickly turned into taking OxyContin. This was from his sophomore to junior year in high school. Within a few months, he was addicted to OxyContin. Taking it daily became very expensive. And he then went over to using heroin, snorting it and injecting it. And he was injecting heroin for about 2 months before he came to our rehab. His mother, Patty, was a teacher, very good mother, very involved with this treatment. And I was working with Billy. And in Therapy 101, they tell us we should be objective with all our patients, but we're human. We, as a psychiatrist or therapist, we like some of our patients more than others, and I'm sure as teachers, you like some of your students more than others. I have two sons. One was about his age. Billy was a great kid, intelligent, infectious laugh, told me about his dream to be an architect one day. And I was following him closely. He did well in treatment. He went back home. He was involved with an outpatient program in his home. And usually I lose track of people when they leave, but I tried to make an agreement with his mother, who was real involved, that I would call them every Monday for at least the next several weeks or months to see how he was doing. And he was doing well, week after week, good report, good report. And she said, well, next Monday will be Billy's 17th birthday. Well, what happened a few days later on the Friday evening, the weekend before his birthday, he wanted to have a new friend come over for a sleepover. And the mother didn't know this friend, so being a good mother, she wanted to talk and kind of assess this kid. And this kid pulled what I call an Eddie Haskell on the mother. For those of you who remember Eddie Haskell, kind of a sociopath, kind of sweet-talked her. Little did she know that he was just an 18-year-old kid himself trapped in his own heroin addiction who was trying to recruit a new customer to sell to so that he could get more money for his drug. Well, they went down in the basement. About a half hour later, she heard the back door slam and saw this other kid run down the driveway. And she went down in the basement and found the lifeless body of her son, Billy, there from a heroin overdose. They tried to revive him. They couldn't. And I should also say, when he was in treatment, and I'll get to this, we wanted to get him on an opioid blocker, and he was unwilling at the time. When I got the call Monday, I heard, Billy's mother, Patty, was calling. I was expecting to hear about his birthday, and I'll never forget what she said. I answered the phone, and she said, today I just bought my son the last birthday present I will ever give him. and it's a casket. And my heart sunk. And, it's still, and I don't think it's come back fully. And as I talked to some processes with some of the people I work with, they said, oh, you're a professional, be objective, don't let that affect you and or bother you. And I think the day the death of a 16-year-old kid doesn't bother me, it's probably time for me to find another line of work. So I want to talk about the subject. Okay. The first slide, which will come up in a few minutes, hopefully, talks about, oh yeah, I'm on a task force with actually Allegheny and Beaver County, where I live in Beaver currently. I've been there since 1985, with drug overdose deaths. When I was at St. Francis back in the early 80s, Allegheny County was averaging about 50 to 55 drug overdose deaths a year. It started picking up in the late 80s. As the new drugs started coming in, prescription medicines and heroin and even cocaine, that number started picking up, and we reached 100 for the first time in 1998. We thought, triple digits, would we ever see this many again? And can you see the slides from over there? 4 years later, 2002, it reached over 200 a year. It's been over 200 a year every year since then. Last year, we set a record for 261 drug overdose deaths. A lot of young people. That is the leading cause of accidental deaths in western Pennsylvania, exceeding traffic fatalities and homicides put together. Now, other counties, what I'm told is, Washington counties, I'm not sure if Mercer County keeps these statistics. A lot of the counties don't keep them in this detail, but the rates are per proportion of population are actually higher in surrounding counties. I know Washington County's rate was double this. And we can get numb by this number. And, I often say if we had 1/10 of these number of people being killed by a serial killer, we'd have the National Guard in our community. Yet this is a serial killer that every year is killing many people, young people, middle-aged people in the prime of their life. We can get numb to these numbers. Let me just do a little drill with you, kind of a visualize. If I say, think of what a National Football League middle linebacker looks like, you get an image. If I say, think of what a lead rider on a Hell's Angel motorcycle gang looks like. If I say, picture an intravenous heroin addict, get an image. And next slide. And how many of you pictured this lovely young girl here, Ashley Outer? She was a girl who died 19 years old from a heroin overdose. Her mother, Roberta Lojak, is a nurse, very good mother. Ashley got involved with an older boyfriend, like many girls do. And when they ended the relationship, she went on the streets to supply her heroin. She was from Highlands High School. She was one of 3 kids who died within 6 months of their graduation from heroin in 2001. That's when the trend first started kind of picking up. Next slide. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this kind of perfect storm. It's the wave of prescription medicines and heroin coming in together. And the problem with opioids has never been worse. If I had more time, I'd get into some the other drugs, whether it be alcohol, marijuana, cocaine. These are all certainly big problems, but I want to focus more on the prescription medicines. This reflects the number of admissions for prescription opioid medicine. These are, not even including heroin across the United States. The darker the color, the greater the rate of admissions. And you look at how it progressed from 99 to 2003 to 2009, tremendously. If you would look right now in our section of western Pennsylvania, we would be the deepest of the dark red. Most drug trends start on the east and west coast and come in our area several years later. We were really one of the epicenters with drugs like Oxycontin, the opioid, this new heroin coming in. A lot of it has to do with our demographics of an older population, a working class population, where we have legitimate need for pain medicine, but unfortunately, some of it got into the right hands, but a lot of it, unfortunately, is getting into the wrong hands. Next slide. It's a major problem. The CDC has declared that prescription medicine abuse is an epidemic in the United States, and the problem is disproportionately higher in western Pennsylvania than in most of the country. Over 48 million people now have had a problem or have used non-medical use of these medicines. Next slide. Certain people more than others, men are more likely to die from women. but we're seeing rural counties have higher problems, but it is everywhere. And one of the myths was, in years past, you thought of these hardcore drug problems as just being in the inner city. Today, nothing is further from the truth. It is every community. I guarantee you, where any of us live, within a stone throw or two, there's a family struggling with a problem with this today. Next slide. In 2008, there were over 15,000 deaths in the United States from drug overdose from prescription medicines. This doesn't include illegal drugs. Actually, 2010, the number was over 16,000, and it's continuing to go up. Emergency room visits have gone up. Next slide. This is incredible. I mean, we do have a need to treat pain adequately, and no one should suffer or be tortured by pain. But I don't know if you're familiar with what a Vicodin contains 5 milligrams of hydrocodone. It's a reasonably strong pain medicine to be given, if you have a condition, to be given a prescription for 20, 30 of them is a fair amount for especially a short-term condition. In 2010, there was enough pain medicine equivalent of Vicodin to give to every man, woman, and child in this United States every 4 hours, around the clock, 24/7 for a month. Okay, that's like over 180 doses for every person in this country. Now seems a little excessive to me, but that's how much is out there. And again, some is helping people, but a lot is being diverted and leading to this problem. Next slide. This just shows the rise in prescription medicine sales from like 97 to 2007 and the rise in opioid deaths. There's been a parallel rise in as the prescriptions go up, there's more deaths. Next slide. And again, for every death, there are other stories. There are people who are struggling and suffering, people going to emergency rooms, having abuse or dependence. And one of the goals we try to do, and I'm again on these task force trying to keep people from dying, is on any one use, the next time any person uses, one of these people, just experimenting, could become one of these people, an overdose fatality. In Beaver County a few years ago, 16-year-old girl from Monaca, great girl, good student, good athlete, was at a party and took 2 pills. What's the harm with taking 2 pills? Well, she didn't realize they were 2 80-milligram Oxycontin. She's opioid naive, as I'll talk later on. That's equivalent to taking 32 Percocet at once. In an opioid naive 16-year-old girl who's small, that proved to be too much, and she did not wake up the next day. Next slide. Common problem in teenagers. They estimate now at least 1 in 5 teenagers have had non-medical use of some of these medicines by the time they graduate. For especially anybody over 30, you didn't even hear of these things when you were in high school. Next slide. And they're very easy to get. They're readily available. Teenagers I was working with a 13-year-old this morning. They say they take it from their parents, from their medicine supply. I have patients who tell me they go to real estate open houses every Sunday to check medicine cabinets, and they're almost always successful. This one guy has this formula of I don't know how he does it, but he looks in the paper, drive-bys the houses, and they can rate houses that are more likely to find medicine in. I'm not quite sure how they do it, but they're pretty ingenious about it. And a lot of people think, well, because it's legal, it's safe. Again, these are tools. When used properly, they can be very helpful in certain medical conditions. When used improperly, they can be very deadly. Next slide. This just shows the rise. There was a big emphasis to treat pain, which we need to. When I talk to physicians, I go in more detail about pain becoming the 5th vital sign. I mean, the medical profession really was not addressing pain adequately for many years. We're doing a better job, but there was more pain medicines being prescribed. There was heavy marketing of some pharmaceutical companies. This just shows the rise of certain medicines from 97 to 2005. This is oxycodone, which is in Percocet and Oxycontin. The rates of prescriptions went up over 700% in that 8-year period. Hydrocodone, Vicodin went up about 300%. Methadone for pain, not the methadone clinics, went up about 1,000%. Next slide. And next slide, push it again. What's interesting is, as these prescriptions went up, we saw a rise in emergency room visits go up. This is for hydrocodone. But look what happened.
I didn't expect you to do that. I wanted to ask you a very important question to our focus. So before the teachers leave, they'll be leaving at 3:30, 3:45? 2:45. So somehow, can you take a very important question before they leave?
Yes.
From me.
I'll take it from you. I can take it from you right now if you want.
Fine. I knew
Sure.
you were a showman and you could do this.
What the heck?
Okay. Sorry to interrupt. It's very important because we're having this transition and teachers are leaving. Doc, question. This is part of what we are experiencing in our system. Years ago, part of our mission was to teach lawyers to make a cogent treatment argument in front of a judge. Because we arrest 1.6 million people every year.
Right.
Okay? Is it good or bad that, is it true that approximately 1 in 7 people who have an addiction seek help?
If we're lucky, probably, maybe that's lifetime, about 1 in 6. So really, close to 70 to 80% of people never even get help for this disease, and that's often because of the stigma and bias against this and just ignorance.
Okay. Now, is it also, the latest research we have indicates that 8.5% of the United States population over age 12 have a substance abuse problem, which is about 25 million Americans.
Yeah. During any 1 year, over a course of a lifetime, it's probably double that.
And the latest studies, that's a March 2011 number.
Yeah.
The latest studies seem to talk about 40 million instead of 25 million.
Yes.
Okay. And that is more than lung, breast, and prostate cancer combined.
Right.
Okay. Now, knowing that only 1 out of 7 even admit they have a problem, and knowing that 40 million Americans, more than lung, breast, and prostate cancer combined, I sound like an attorney, huh? Combined, basically, are out there, yes, and only 1 in 7 seek treatment. Let me throw a statistic on you. This is a lemonade to lemon moment, maybe, potential here. If 37% of those people who seek treatment are referred by criminal justice, as all the studies suggest, is that a bad thing that's a good thing?
That's a good thing, and there's room for improvement.
Correct. So even though we're arresting 1.6 million people every year, and I'm not happy about that, by the way. I'm an attorney. I'm on the other side. Okay? We know, do you mean, we know that we have 5% of the Earth's population and 25% of its prison population. That's a bad thing, but maybe we can make a good thing because 37% of that number, 592,000, might seek treatment. That, to me, sounds like a good development.
Yes.
So the idea of doctors and lawyers working together starts to become viable.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll have more to say at the end of my talk.
Exactly.
But
Now, I wanted to make sure the teachers got that because, Doctor, you and I know you've taught in some of the most brilliant groups, and you're very, very, very famous. And I'm not saying that to put you on a spot.
My
but
wife would disagree.
Okay. Mine would too, by the way. Okay. But I'm not putting you on a spot, but we both know that we walk into classrooms regularly, and sometimes there's 10 or 12 people. So these educators, these professional teachers, that can gel this community and bring people to hear what you have to say is a great coalition for all three, correct?
Absolutely, and also because they work with young people. We want to try to prevent this. We want to try
Proactively.
to be proactive with the kids who have the developing brains.
I'm done. Okay. I rest my case. I'm going to let you go back to where we started. It's not my case, but that's why we're here, people. Thank you for listening. I didn't want these wonderful, patient, professional educators to leave without knowing we need you. We have something important to say, but you're the gateway to disseminating that information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you, at the end, I do have I talk more about everyone working together, and this is a great triangle with. But I like to think of it as even more people involved. The clergy, the business. The educators, many facets of the community, and I'll just continue. And Angela, if you need anytime you want to, if it could be helpful for this to be interactive, you can interject at any time.
I will assist in any way you want because I am convinced that if you give me one teacher up here like Jackie Resmus, you and I can begin to make the difference when 3 of us stand together.
Right.
So you call on me whatever you want me to say. I'm not going to interrupt again.
If you feel called to do so, you're welcome. Okay. And I really admire Angelo's passion. And this is, like I've been in this field for so years, and this is inspiring that there's people who care about this for many years. Sometimes I thought I was just in the dark cave alone. But we see with, like I said, we saw parallel rise in hydrocodone going up and then emergency rooms, but oxycodone started going up, and all of a sudden you had this huge rise in emergency rooms. What happened? It was the form of oxycodone. This was the new one, the OxyContin, that came out, and it was a much more powerful form, which we'll talk about in some future slides. Next slide. Huge problem in our area. Like I said, most drug trends start on the east or west coast. I saw my first OxyContin patient in 1999. Who told me, because these were supposed to be time-release medicines that you swallow them. Like I said, a common one is an 80-milligram OxyContin. That's equal to 16 Percocet in one pill. It's meant to be swallowed and give this amount over 12 hours. Well, first patient I saw come in, he says, I'm doing OxyContin. I said, well, you mean oxycodone? He says, oh, no, doctor, I crush it and chew it, and I get this immediate burst of the oxycodone all at once. And I thought, geez, I wonder if this is interesting. I wonder if I'll see another one of these. Well, the next week I saw 2, next week 5. Within a couple months I was seeing about 20 a week, and after about 3,000, I've certainly lost count. A lot started appearing in the media. Next slide. Here's a story we did with New York Times Magazine. This is Kurt. I'm happy to say Kurt is doing well now in recovery. He's doing some good Christian-based counseling. Kurt had 20 senior citizens in a high-rise in Beaver County working for him to get OxyContin. He had people on fixed incomes that he would approach and offer them money. Some of them he told him he needed for his grandfather, and I think maybe some of them bought into it, and maybe some of them didn't care. I had 2 people in Pittsburgh, had over 50 people going to doctors working for them. Next slide. People die from addiction other than from drug overdose deaths. This is a story we did with People magazine. Bobby Wingard, on track to be what many thought was going to be a very good professional hockey player in Windberg, PA, outside of Johnstown. Athletic injuries, as we've heard about before, got on pain medicine, got on OxyContin, got trapped on it, got very depressed that he couldn't break away from his dependence, and took his own life and committed suicide. And there's rates of suicide with people in addiction are 20 to 120 times higher than the average population. Next slide. As one drug comes around, often another one surpasses it. Opan is a drug that started hitting the scene about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. It's double, triple the strength of OxyContin. Now, fortunately, in recent years, they've changed they reformulated the outside of OxyContin and Opana, so it's harder to crush it and snort it. The Purdue Pharma, I'm glad they did it. They were about 10 years overdue. I was talking to them years ago, but I'm glad they came around. By next year this time, there's a new medicine that's likely to come out, maybe even I shouldn't say next year, we're already into 2013, within a few months, a medicine called Zohydro. It's going to be equal to 10 Vicodin in one pill, maybe 20. And as of now, they're not planning on a crush resistant outside, and this could be the new OxyContin on the street, and hopefully there will be some intervention to kind of slow that down. Next slide. I just wanted to talk a little bit, because we have some medical people, about where's this coming from. We're not getting all these drugs. They're not coming from Colombia, Afghanistan, South America. Most of them are coming from local physicians' offices. And many of them are, I really believe most physicians are ethical, well-meaning. We do have rogue doctors out there who have these big practices who don't care, and we've definitely got to stop them. But in terms of, there's people who are professional drug seekers. They go to multiple doctors a day trying to scheme and scam. Drug seeking is trying to get a medicine for other than a legitimate medical purpose. Next slide. It's common. Now, diversion are people who get it and reroute it in an unauthorized way. They give it away or they sell it away. Then there's a term misuse. That's, you take it yourself, but you do it in a way that other than your doctor said. For instance, if your doctor says, I want you to take 2 pills a day and you take 22 pills a day, that's a problem. Or if they say, I want you to take it by mouth and you snort it, or you break it down and you inject it IV, and this happens all the time, that's obvious misuse. Next slide. There's a difference between a real patient and a pseudo-patient, and these are, and it's important that medical staff offices try to figure this out. A pseudo-patient is somebody who comes in, pretends to be a patient, but they have no real desire to get medical help. What they want to get prescription or pills from you so that they can, use it themselves, non-medically, or sell it. A real patient really does have intent, but they may misuse it, or they may want to take some of them themselves or give maybe some to a friend who doesn't have insurance or something like that, and you really start going down a slippery slope when you start doing that. Next slide. Now, why would somebody try to seek drugs? Well, they may try to get a drug that they're addicted to themselves. They may want to try to get, Oxycontin or Xanax or Opana or hydrocodone or something that they're dependent on, and that's their main drug. They may be somebody who's addicted to heroin, but is having trouble getting heroin, so they may want some of these pills to hold them over, when they don't have heroin, so that they don't get sick. I'll talk a little about Suboxone in a few more slides, but it's commonly diverted for that reason. They could be somebody addicted to cocaine, and they don't give away drugs free. So if I go to doctors and I get these other pills and I sell them on the street, you can get very good money. I mean, oxycodone on the street is going 50 cents to $1 per milligram. The average person we see coming in treatment is using about 200 milligrams a day. It's about $100 a day. You can start using your imagination with what do people have to do to come up with the money for these things. Part of it is selling drugs, shoplifting. So much of our crime, as our law enforcement people know, is connected with that. And another ugly way is I've had, unfortunately, many young people, young teenage girls and boys involved with teenage prostitution. I had a young girl a few years ago with Oxycontin who switched over to heroin, and I figured she was using about $100 or more a day. And I said, how do you come up with the money? And she said, well, I love music. I had over 300 CDs. I sold all my CDs. Then I sold all my jewelry. Then I sold almost everything in my house. And this was a 17-year-old National Honor Society girl who then broke down into tears. And then she said, then I started to sell myself. And once you get trapped in addiction, you do what you need to do to keep it going, and it can get quite ugly. They may be a professional drug dealer. Next slide. Trying to recognize these people can be very difficult. I mean, this is my specialty, and I get fooled, so I'm sympathetic with the average doctor on the front line struggling with this. They're often unwilling to really cooperate. If you're really trying to get over a condition, you'll cooperate with your doctor, but they're often unwilling to give you names of references. They'll often request or try to steer you in a direction for a certain drug. They have no real interest in diagnosis. They make it very dramatic, exaggerate their symptoms. Next slide. They may often say, I'm here because my doctor is out of town. I have patients who look in obituaries and wait and find when a doctor dies, and then they'll call around and say, oh, I love my Dr. Smith, he passed away. I don't know if you saw the obituary. Now I need another, I'm out of my Percocet. They'll use tactics. They'll usually come in and they'll try to be extremely nice. They'll come in and tell a practitioner, I heard you're the best doctor in town. You're great. You understand me like no one else has. Doctors get beaten down through the course of a busy day, and you're feeling pretty good about that. But then if you don't give in to them, then they'll go the other way. They'll start attacking you. Who are you? Where did you go to school? Why are you in this town? You're not in Pittsburgh. Why, And I was just at a conference in Florida where they have a big problem with prescription medicines, and physicians say then what's happening even worse is they're threatening the doctors. They come in and say, doctor, got 2 sons, got a daughter going to this high school. Yeah, I know where you live. And are you going to refill my prescription today? So that can get quite intimidating. Next slide. When a medical practice and a physician, nurse, or somebody involved with the medical practice is looking to make a decision on to give a controlled substance, and there are definitely reasons to give these things. There are many reasons, legitimate reasons. But you have to say, is there, number one, a legitimate medical purpose for this? Does this drug, is it going to improve the patient's quality of life? Am I going to help this patient maintain control? give a week's supply, then come back and I'll check in with you. Don't give, a month with 4 refills and then, see you in 5 months. And believe me, that this goes on at times. Is there any evidence of any other illegal drug use or alcohol use? Again, a person who has an alcohol problem is also at risk to have a drug problem. They work on it. Alcohol is nothing more than a liquid drug when it hits the brain. And are the doses appropriate? If your normal dose is 4 pills a day and this patient is now on, again, 40 pills a day, that's too much. And sometimes you gradually increase and increase. Sometimes the doctor has to take a step back and say, wow, this is 3 standard deviations above what I usually do. Next, and if you can't answer, if you have any one positive on this, you really need to reassess. And next slide, and it's, when I was in medical school, they said, they were talking about Valium, which was big back then. They said it takes 30 seconds to write a prescription. Sometimes it takes 30 minutes not to write a prescription. It's important that it's easy to write a prescription. It's hard to come to an understanding of people, and it's important that we really try to understand people, whether we're in a medical profession, legal, or teachers. Next slide. And how big of a problem are prescription medicine today? A huge problem. Next slide. Next one. This leads me to heroin. Anyone certainly over 30 probably never even heard of heroin other than being in your communities. It was mainly a drug of the inner cities for years and years and years. Right now, there is heroin everywhere. There's not a school district, there's not a town where heroin is being used and sold. I live in quaint little Beaver, Pennsylvania. I coached Little League Baseball 10 years. I've had, in the last 2 years, 4 kids that were in our Little League programs, come in. One was on a ventilator for 26 hours, almost died from aspiration after a heroin overdose. What happens to people is prescription medicines are very expensive, and as they start off with maybe a few pills a day, it becomes more and more and more, and then the day comes when they're up to costing them $100 or $200 a day. They can't afford it. Somebody says, you can keep yourself from getting sick or get the same high by using heroin, which is a fraction of the cost, maybe 1/5, 1/6 the cost a day, and they switch over. And I have seen thousands of people. I would say of the new heroin addicts that I've seen, and there have been thousands over the last few years, 95 to 99% of them all start with prescription medications. Next slide. And this just shows the rise in admissions in Allegheny County for heroin, and we've seen this throughout all of western Pennsylvania, certainly Mercer County, Lawrence County, all the counties. Next slide. What has happened is the heroin that's out now is even much stronger than years ago. The heroin that was out in the Woodstock era, 60s, 70s, going into the early 80s, was mainly from Asia, and that averaged around 10 to 15% purity. Heroin use went down for a few years when HIV and AIDS became part of our awareness. The new drug that started coming on was cocaine, crack cocaine, and snorting and smoking drugs became popular. While the people making cocaine, the Colombians and people in South Central America, they found that, we can introduce a new product. If you can get heroin over 50% pure, and now in our area it's 70 and often 90% pure, you don't have to use a needle. You can now start off by snorting it or smoking it. Almost everybody I see starts off snorting it or smoking it, and you can get a legitimate high. They quickly become addicted to that, and within about 3 to 6 months, the majority are over to using needles. Next slide. This is Zach Zion from Fort City. The last kid people thought would be maybe in the high school ever use heroin. A great athlete, student involved with community activities. He, they believe the first, maybe the second time he ever used heroin, he overdosed and died. And as I talk to young people, and I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but with these substances, anytime you use it, it's literally a game of Russian roulette. I mean, these things are so potent and strong, and again, when you buy it from the street, even experienced drug users often die with using even small amounts because they're what they call hot bags. There was a batch laced with a drug called fentanyl. It's like almost 100 times stronger than morphine a number of years ago. It was called Get High or Die Trying, and in a 24-hour period, there was 8 deaths in Pittsburgh, and there were hundreds across the Northeast. Next slide. And what we're seeing is the pattern. It's become, it's way beyond just an inner city drug. It's in every community, upper middle class. In fact, often the more affluent the neighborhoods are, the more likely there may be a problem because they're good customers. A lot of the parents are naive. I get calls literally every day from families just struggling, saying they can't understand how this could happen to their family. Next slide. This just shows how the price of heroin has gone down as the purity has gone up. Next slide. As I said, most people start by snorting it, but within a few months they go over to injecting it. Injecting it is much more powerful. Once they go to injecting it, they almost never go back. Next slide. And what else happens? Because people are using needles, we're seeing an epidemic of hepatitis C, okay? Hepatitis C is a virus in the liver that over time a number of people can get cirrhosis from it. Liver cancer maybe require a liver transplant, particularly if they don't get treatment, and people often with addiction aren't taking good care of themselves. We had a young girl who went through treatment, was doing well, was about a month out of treatment, started getting sick, went to her local family doctor. They weren't sure what was going on. She developed a high fever, collapse. They took her into Pittsburgh to Presby, and she had septicemia all through her body. She had a bacterial endocarditis.
And you send me something that says John Doe will do Suboxone in weaning dosages downward, or whatever, or that's your goal. And sooner or later, your goal is to make him totally abstinent and maybe put him on a chemical blockade like Rivia or an injectable blockade. Is that not an unusual, that's not an unusual prescription, right?
No.
Okay.
No,
now that's a plan. That's a treatment plan. Okay, so last time I interrupted everybody, I was telling everybody that we have 1.6 annual million people a year arrested. We have 37% of those coming from criminal justice, 592,000 cases. We already know this is a good thing, lawyers and doctors working together instead of suing each other, okay? Yeah. Second thing, now we know that you, the expert, not some poor drug court judge that's never been to med school, and some attorney that's been taught by these beautiful educators how to work together, and you send the treatment plan to this guy's cell phone, and he Bluetooths it to the printer, hands it to the judge, and the judge incorporates that as a order of enforceable by law. Now, have I helped you by making your treatment strategy binding, or he goes to jail?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I rest my second case.
And actually, we're back on.
Yeah.
Hey, hey, man. We had a priest here. I know. I knew we were in. We're gold. We're good. So, but Angelo, the point is, most people who have addictions do what they have to do to keep their addiction going, else because their brains get hijacked, as I'll show in a few slides. The criminal activities they do as a result of it are because they're in addiction. You know, if you can treat their disease, then that behavior, that's a symptom of the disease. You know, yeah, there are some sociopathic people who develop addiction and you treat their addiction, they're still sociopath, but that's a small percentage. That's maybe 5% of the people involved with addiction. Probably 90–95% are people are not going to be committing these activities if you can treat their disease of addiction. So why not treat it? Why you know, it's actually much less money. It's much costlier not to treat it and incarcerate them and treat all their medical problems. I mean, studies have shown for every dollar you put into addiction treatment, you save from like $8 to $14 in legal, medical, and other societal costs. We're back on. Okay, thank you. Next slide. The religious philosopher John Donne years ago said, no man is an island, as he was talking about the Black Plague when two men were walking outside, and when every time somebody would die, the church bells would toll, and one person said to the other, "For whom the bell tolls?" In other words, well, who died? And of course, you know the famous quote. He says, "No man is an island, entirely all themselves. When part of the land breaks off, we are all the less of it." And he said, "Never sin to know for whom the bell tolls for thee." And I'm here to say, no man is an island. And next slide. No person with addiction is an island. They are interdependent on many people. Next slide. For every person with addiction, there are at least 4 or 5 other people, often family members, significantly impacted on a regular basis, go through pain, go through agony. And there are many other people, 7 to 16, co-workers, neighbors affected. So every time somebody progresses in a disease, it has this ripple effect of pain and suffering through numerous other people. But the good news, every time we can help a person, it can help, improve, a family and a whole society. I'm a professional volunteer with Worldwide Al-Anon, really trying to teach alcoholism and addiction is a family disease, and it's really a community disease. So we not only help the person, but because we are not islands, we are all interconnected, we help ourselves and we help everybody. Next slide. I just wanted to make that. Again, as my mentor, Dr. Tversky, taught me years ago, this is a biopsychosocial spiritual disease. Unfortunately, a lot of the treatment historically has been fragmented. Some people get good spiritual help, but no social help. Some people get medical or biological help, and they ignore all this other stuff. Again, when we do all of these together, and as I'm going to get into the next part more about treatment, medicine, therapy, spiritual work, that's when we get the best outcomes. Next slide. Again, to show you the power of addiction, and we often say addiction hijacks the brain. They do experiments with laboratory mice. These poor mice, what we do to them sometimes. But where they give them a lever to push for food or water, and then they'll give them a lever to push for other fun things, play with other mice toys, and they'll do these fun things as much as they can, but then they always go back to food or water eventually, because their brains are hardwired through millions of years of evolution to survive. If you don't feed a mouse for a couple days, or any animal other than a human for a couple days, and put food in front of the mouse, he's got to eat it. He can't say, I'm going to fast this afternoon in honor of Mickey Mouse's birthday or something like that. They have to eat. They have no choice. But guess what? When they give them a lever to push for drugs of addiction in their brain, they've done this mainly with opioids and cocaine, but also alcohol. Next slide. Guess what they do? They push the lever for the drug of addiction, ignoring food or water, to the point of death. Well, how can that be? How can that override the hardwiring of the brain? That's because what addiction tricks the brain. Addiction works in the primitive parts of the brain and sends a signal to your rational part, the prefrontal cortex, and says, you need to give me more of this drug or substance or you're going to die. That may not be a rational one, but it's an overpowering one. So when you look at somebody and say, well, why don't you just stop? Don't you care about your family? Yeah. Don't you care about your job? Don't you care about your life? Of course they do. I believe often people with addiction care more than most people. But again, their brains get hijacked. Now, the good news is through treatment and recovery, we can reverse that in a very powerful way. Next slide. Just want to talk about treatment, and this is for all addictions. It just has the word heroin up there. But really, science has really taught us when you integrate medicine and therapy, again, holistic approaches of counseling, spiritual work, biological things together, we get the best outcomes. Next slide. Next slide. Some of these are a couple parts. We want to talk about what is medication assisted defined. You want to use medicines to benefit treatment. And medicines are relatively kind of new in addiction treatment for the most part. Where the state of medicines in addiction treatment is kind of like where the state of medicines were in psychiatry maybe 30, 40 years ago. Again, the medicines can be a mixed blessing, as we all know. Used properly, they can help, but used carelessly, they can certainly cause problems. And it's not medicines versus other treatments. Some people think, well, you're either going to do medicines or you're going to do 12-step or this. No. You can do them together. Again, biopsychosocial, spiritual. Next slide. And to help with recovery, what are some of the things we're trying to do? You can use medicines, and we'll go into a little more detail, to stop withdrawal symptoms, to help with detox. Once somebody's done with acute detox symptoms from any substance for the first week, they can go on for many weeks or months with what we call post-acute withdrawal, where they're irritable, anxious, their energy is down, and that's where we lose a lot of people. Medicines can help with that. Some medicines can help with cravings. Some medicines can be used to block the effects of certain drugs, kind of like shields, and to reduce harm, prevent deaths and overdoses. Next slide. Medicine can be used for detox. There's a whole variety of them. There's anti-craving, and I'll go into a little more detail. Drugs like naltrexone can be used for block cravings for alcohol or opioids. Topiramate is still experimental for cocaine, acamprosate craving for alcohol. Blockers to block the effects, naltrexone blocks the effects of opioids. There's some vaccines. You know, you heard about the genetics. In the next couple of years, when people come into programs, there's some good research that there may be some genetic mapping that we do that will guide us to certain medicines for better response rates. There's deterrence. There's a drug called antabuse that if you take it and you drink, you get violently ill, so it deters drinking. And there's maintenance medicines, methadone and buprenorphine, otherwise known as Suboxone. Next slide. But I just want to talk briefly about what happens when we don't treat people, or what's kind of the course of heroin. This is a study that followed over 33 years, about 600 heroin addicts, starting in the mid-1960s in California. These were men in the criminal justice system. Now, this was a time when the heroin was around 10 to 15%, not as strong as it was today. What they found is, and there was probably minimal treatment during a lot of these people's lives, and there's certainly minimal medicine treatment. Methadone was one medicine for some of them. What they found is that their lives had repeated drug abuse, crime, health problems, and death. Next slide. And actually, 50% of the group died. I mean, and they had a death rate that was 50 to, for heroin addicts, the moral of the story is heroin does not have a happy ending. And you can say this with a lot of addiction, but particularly heroin. Chances of dying were 50 to 100 times greater than people their own age not doing heroin. That's an incredible amount. Even those who survived, I think 97% of them had felonies. Many of them spent time in jail on public assistance. Not that there's anything wrong with public assistance, but people had loss of dreams and loss of potential. It was very sad. Now, this was a group from the mid-60s to the mid to late 90s. Is this going to be the fate? We have now more people using heroin in our communities, our children, young people, from 12 years to 60 years old. Is this going to be their fate? I hope not, but this might have been a different group, people in a different time and place. But that was heroin that was probably 1/5 to 1/8 the potency that they're doing today. So, we'll see how things go. Next slide. Mortality rates. We don't have time to go into a lot of detail about things. One form of treatment is methadone. Methadone gets mixed reviews, but methadone is a very well proven form of at least harm reduction. What they show is people on methadone, it reduces death rates about 70%. And it's hard to treat a dead person, as they taught me in medical school. So, and I'm serious. So it at least is now, if done properly, it's a way to at least stabilize somebody from active addiction. Problem with both, I would say, methadone and Suboxone and buprenorphine, these are very good medicines for the right person at the right time, but people get on them and often don't make other changes in their life. You still need to work, in my opinion, a strong recovery program. Next slide. Some arguments for methadone are, there certainly it keeps people out of jail, it keeps them off of the streets, off of heroin, it gives them immediate relief. It blocks the high from heroin, it saturates the receptor. Now, because I'm not going to get to a lot of detail, you can still use heroin on top of it and overdose and die. And again, with buprenorphine Suboxone, it has a blocking effect that prevents that. Next slide. It kind of may stabilize brain chemistry. Keep going. There's definitely harm reduction, lower rates of AIDS, hepatitis C, legal complications. So there, lives do improve on it. Next slide. Some problems with maintenance, and you can apply this to any maintenance drug, whether it be methadone, buprenorphine, which is Suboxone, there used to be one called LAM, is you still have them on an opioid. Is that going to cause some problems? Is that going to get their brain so used to opioids that they'll never get off of it? And for some people, they may say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If somebody is living a healthy, normal life and on it and not doing activities of addiction, may not be a bad thing, but you've got to, again, be careful. And there's some, there's the old saying, no pain, no gain. There's a lot of people who in recovery who are having great lives in recovery who believe that getting through the pain of it kind of taught them a lesson. And that may be true for certain people. What we found was when we didn't use these medicines, we had much more people leave treatment, and we actually wrote a paper using them for detox. It was called Less Pain, More Gain. And next slide. Buprenorphine. Buprenorphine is the main medicine that's in Suboxone and Subutex. Very common. It's really picked up over the last 10 years. I was following it in the medical literature from the early 1990s. Many studies with it being used. It seemed to take forever to get to the United States. Next slide. They make it difficult for physicians to use it. And they said, well, this is a drug. It's a powerful drug. It's a drug that we're going to use in addiction treatment, and we just don't want any doctor using it. You have to be qualified. So to be qualified, and this makes sense to a large degree, you either have to be an addiction specialist, or you have to go through at least an extra 8-hour training course, which I think is a good thing to learn about it. But sometimes that 8-hour training course is still minimal for people who aren't otherwise trained in addiction. Next slide. What it is, and I know there's some non-medical people, but briefly, it's what we call partial agonist. With most opioids, like whether it be methadone, Oxycontin, Vicodin, Opana, the more you use, the greater the effect. So eventually, no matter what your tolerance, you reach respiratory depression, coma, and death. Buprenorphine gives a strong opioid effect, but at a medium level, it basically shuts the receptor off and no more comes in. And so that happens at about 20 milligrams of buprenorphine. You can give 20 milligrams and give 20,000 milligrams, and it's going to give about the exact same result because no more than 20 gets in. The other thing is, at like around 20, and actually the common dose we recommend is 16 is really enough for most people, in my opinion. At 16 milligrams, if they try to do heroin, Oxycontin on top of that, it blocks those from working too. So it's safe, and it really has a dramatic rate on reducing drug overdose deaths. Next slide. It's a medicine that can be used when you use medicines in withdrawal. As I tell my patients, when you're coming off of detoxing from any substance, whether it's alcohol or opioids, it's like falling off a cliff. If you do it on your own, you crash real hard and it's painful. Most people end up using before they fully hit the bottom. What we try to do in detox is give you parachutes or sliding boards to come down more gradually in a safe, controlled manner. If you don't do that, people usually don't stay around. They vote with their feet and they leave. Next slide. When somebody's been doing an opioid, like a pain medicine or heroin, for a while and then they stop, the street term of opioid withdrawal is getting dope sick, and it's a terrible condition. My patients describe it like having the worst case of the flu you ever had in your life, multiplied times 10. Feel like there's vices in your head and knives in your stomach. It's just a horrible condition, and that's why they keep trapped in it and do it day after day after day. Next slide. We started using Suboxone. We do a 6-day detox, and and there was it was kind of a controversial thing in our rehab, which was an abstinence-based rehab historically. I started using this, and I said, is it really working? I had some therapists coming up to me and say, well, you're biased, you're a doctor. I don't know if I can keep working here if you're going to be giving dope to our patients. And I said, can't help a dead person, and can't help somebody who's not with us. So we did a study where, and I'm going to go into details, 172 patients, half we gave Suboxone to, half just got our regular treatment, support, and therapy. The group we gave Suboxone to, we retained over 97% of them from detox into our rehab. Those we didn't give it to, we lost over half of them. That was a huge difference, huge difference. And that didn't mean all these people lived happily ever after, but at least we had a fighting chance to work with them. So I've used it in detox of 6,000 to 7,000 people over the last 10 years, and it is often a dramatic way. I had a girl came in tears, didn't believe it was going to work the other day, and I said, try it. And I saw her this morning, and she's doing much better. She's ready to leave and go home. The first person I gave it to was a woman who had been with us. This was back in, I think it was the first physician legally using Suboxone in beginning of March of 2003. And I said, I want to find the sickest of the sick patient. I said, bring this. And they said, well, there's this woman in room 4. And I said, well, bring her to my office. They said, she can't come to your office. She's in bed. She was in bed with her head in a garbage can, throwing up, just very sick. And I said, I have this new medicine for detox. I think you'll find it helpful. And she says, I don't know. I'll give it a try. I don't think anything's going to work. And it was a dramatic help. She felt much better within an hour. And the next day I talked to her. She said, I'm feeling great now. But I didn't believe this was going to work. I was at the end of my rope. When you offered this to me, I said if this wasn't going to work, I was going to go home and I was going to kill myself because I had given up hope. So she stayed with us, and that woman is doing well today. Next slide. Some of the objectives of any maintenance therapy, whether it's Suboxone or methadone, again, is to reduce harm, reduce crime, overdose deaths, infections like AIDS. Next slide. I'll kind of move on. This is a study they did in France that they were better able to do it, I guess, because they have more of a socialized medicine. They were having a dramatic rise in drug overdose deaths, and they put everyone they could find on heroin, 90% on Suboxone, 10% on methadone, and within 2 years they had a 79% reduction in drug overdose deaths. No matter what you think of these things, I'm sure there was a lot of mothers and fathers who were glad that it was given to them. Next slide. Before you think buprenorphine is the best thing since sliced bread, it's a great tool. Again, like any tool, if used properly, it's helpful, but we're now having a problem with widespread diversion on the street. How much more time do I got?
Whatever you want, but if you give us some idea, you have a question.
I probably 10, 15 minutes to go. Okay. There's a lot of it being diverted on the street. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people come into me, tell me that they've taken Suboxone from a friend or bought it on the street. I rarely see a street Suboxone addict. Most of them use it for home detox or to hold them over if they don't have another drug. Part of the problem is the demand for it exceeds the physicians. They have a 100-patient limit on physicians. And I'll just leave it at, there's a bell-shaped curve of how physicians do it. Some do it in a very responsible way, some do it in a marginal way, and some in a over-the-edge way. Okay, next slide. A growing problem, we talked about this epidemic of opioids, we're now seeing a parallel epidemic of a medicine group called benzodiazepines. This is the Valium, Xanax family, Klonopin. These are medicines that are used for anxiety, and sometimes they can be very useful tools. What's happening is more and more people doing opioids have such a tolerance that they can't feel them as much anymore, so to boost the effects, they use a benzodiazepine with it. The problem is that's very, very dangerous. If the danger rating of opioids overdose by itself, let's say, was a 2, and the overdose rate of benzos was 1. When you take them together, you don't get a 3, you get maybe an 8 or a 10. They really have a synergistic effect, and a high percentage of people we see are dying or using both of these. 10 years ago, maybe 5–10% of opioid people coming in were using benzos. Now it's like 50 to 70% of them are using them. We're having to do parallel detoxes, which can be quite tricky and challenging. Next slide. I want to talk about kind of another way to go. These are the opioid blockers. These are very useful tools. They're grossly underutilized, in my opinion. There's a pill form of naltrexone was called Revia. It actually came out, originally was for you old-timers, was called Trexan. It came out around 1984. So it's been out now for, going on 28, 29 years, and most physicians aren't even aware of what this medicine is. A form came out, was FDA approved about 2.5 years ago, called Vivitrol. It gives you a shot, which Angela was talking about, which gives you a blocking dose, which we'll have more to say, for 30 days at a time, and that offers a huge advantage in treating addiction. Then there's off-label FDA Some doctors put these skin implants where they'll put these pellets that may give slow release of naltrexone from 1 month up to 3 months. I've heard even longer. Mixed results with them, but some people can kind of rip them out of their skin, but they can be used and they can be helpful things, but they're, again, not FDA approved. Next slide. Just kind of talking about what is this opioid blocker thing I'm talking about. When somebody uses an opioid, okay, whether it's a Percocet, a Vicodin, a codeine pill, or heroin, the opioid, whether they take it by mouth, snort it, or inject it, the opioid molecule gets in their blood system like a little ball. If you inject it, it gets there a lot faster. But you don't feel it until that molecule travels up to their brain and hits the opioid receptor. It's like a baseball hitting a catcher's mitt. When it hits it, they get the high. When it's out here, you get nothing. What this naltrexone, this blocker, does is it blocks the receptor. It puts a wall in front of the receptor, so if somebody tries to use it, comes up, it can't get in. It can't get in at all. And you pass it out in your urine, it'd still be positive in a drug test, but you feel absolutely nothing. I tell my patients, if I gave you 10 bags of heroin or 10 80-oxycontin or 10 water pills, if you're on this medicine and you tried it, you couldn't know the difference. And that's true. I mean, I had a woman a little while ago who was on it 3 days who came up to me and says, I said, how you doing? She goes, I'll be honest with you, Doc, I went to the north side last night and got a bundle of heroin, that's 10 bags, and then shot up all 10. I said, holy cow, what happened? She goes, not a darn thing. She goes, it was just like I shot up 10 bags of water. She goes, then I got so dang mad, I thought, you know, I could have bought a new pair of shoes that I wanted instead of wasting my money on that dope. So and because it blocks, it quiets the receptor, and it reduces cravings. Yes? Oh, yes. The difference between the pill price and shot price is dramatic. Okay. The pill price, which is now generic, is $70 to maybe $100 a month. That's what I'm told. Maybe a little more, a little less in some areas. The shot now is for a month, for a Vivitrol shot is $1,200, which is obscenely high in my opinion. I'm being recorded. I don't care, but. But
it is obscenely high.
But
if you take the amount it costs a person not to have a job,
right, but
or also drugs,
right, that is high. The good news is it is covered by many insurance companies. But on a positive note, it is still, in my opinion, an investment worth making. I mean, what price do we put on a human life? And there's actually research showing that when you use this medicine, that there's a cost savings in healthcare costs and alone. I mean, this is why a lot of the insurance companies are willing to cover it, because they're spending less money on readmissions to emergency rooms, to detox units, to intensive care units. It's very high. There is a discount program that some people qualify, can get it for $640, but there's insurances that cover. There's some local insurances. I don't know if we want to. I don't want to say names right now, but Highmark does not cover it, and they're one of the few in the country, and we're working on them. And okay, and they've been a leader in addiction treatment in other areas, and I hope they step to the plate and do the right thing with this. It is expensive, but it's not a lifelong medicine. We often recommend it for 6 to 12 months. It's actually parallel to similar long-acting medicines used in schizophrenia, which are also important and necessary, that can be used for many, many years. But the good news is it's not addicting. There's no withdrawal from it. You can be on it for months or years and stop it and have no withdrawal from it. Next slide. Again, it blocks the high. It reduces the cravings. Now, one caveat with it I should mention: not only will it keep new opioids from coming in, if there's any old opioids still in there, it will throw them out and throw you into withdrawal. There's a shot called Narcan. You may have heard naloxone. When somebody overdoses, this is what we give them. It eliminates opioids from the receptor. This is basically long-acting Narcan. That's all it is. And so if physicians aren't familiar with it, I say it's long-acting Narcan. All physicians know what Narcan is. but you have to wait. A person has to be detoxed and be opioid-free for 7 or 10 days. I like to see more like 10 to 14 days. And that's the challenge often. It's often hard to do for outpatients. We've been using it now as an inpatient because we have people where we can detox them. As Angela was saying, we can use medicines like Suboxone to help give a person a nice sliding board, have them come down, maybe be on it for a while to stabilize their life, then have them come down, then transition them over to a blocker, and they're opioid free. There's been people that I've tried to advised and pleaded with to take this who didn't, and then who overdosed and died within weeks or months later. And I know had they been on it, they would have survived that. In fact, probably 95 to 99%, maybe 100% of all those opioid overdose deaths, if they were on an opioid blocker the day of their overdose, would have survived. And that's now again, it's a tool. As I tell my patients, it gives you abstinence from opioids. It doesn't give you recovery. Recovery is abstinence plus change by living and working and embracing a program of recovery. Again, this is a good bio-treatment, but we need biopsychosocial spiritual treatment to reach our best outcome. This just is the studies with Vivitrol that were done in Russia, and they had minimal therapy involved. There was some therapy, but nothing even equivalent to an IOP or partial, and certainly not daily 12-step meetings. But even with it alone, 90% of the people on the Vivitrol had opioid-free weeks compared to the placebo of 35% free weeks. Huge difference. Next one. It's the only medicine shown to statistically reduce cravings. There is a big difference in the Vivitrol versus placebo people with cravings, much less cravings from the Vivitrol. So it wasn't just a placebo effect, it's a real effect. Next slide. And continuation in treatment. We know this, the longer people stay in treatment, the better they do. If somebody leaves treatment, that's not good. They're usually using within 24 hours or sometimes 24 minutes. People on the Vivitrol were retained 168 days versus placebo only 96 days. A big difference. And I'd like to think in our country we can have better outcomes because these people didn't have, again, 12-step fellowship and the robust therapy support that we can offer here. Next slide. Is there a problem? So some people say, well, you need to struggle through the cravings, and there's an argument to be made. But what happens with that, most people lose that battle with that struggle and end up using. Cravings die down over time as a person normalizes their life and changes people, places, and things. Next slide. Other things to help a person. I just want to talk briefly. I don't want to skim over it, but 12-step recovery. Whether you're on a medicine or not, I strongly recommend programs AA and NA. I realize some people may not work for them, but your chances of success are so much better. It's free. They're everywhere. And to be involved in a good program, you have to have frequent attendance, have a sponsor, and a home group. Next slide. An insurance company actually did a study, Kaiser Permanente in California. I was at a meeting where they presented this data a number of years in 2004. And I'd like to think they're interested in human lives, and I know there are, but they're interested also in their costs. And they were trying to think, what things can people with addiction do to minimize repeat admissions to programs over 5 years? What gives them success over 5 years? Now know this, if you get a medicine that has a 20, 30% difference over a placebo, that's considered pretty good. Well, being regular involvement with 12-step recovery, and that involved, their definition was averaging 3 meetings a week, having a sponsor and home group. They had a 450% better rate of success than people who didn't do that. That's a huge difference. So I strongly recommend that for all my patients. Next slide. And physicians, and I'll just say, I've worked, this disease doesn't discriminate. I've worked on a physician's health program. We see the best outcomes with physicians hovering 85 to 90% because we treat them intensely and monitor them intensely for 5 or 10-year period. Most people with addiction, they go into a treatment program, you might get a couple weeks and you're on your own. Addiction is a chronic disease. We treat it as it's the flu. And, it should be treated more and thought of more like diabetes, hypertension, follow it as an ongoing basis, and we'll have better results. Next slide. And again, the goal is rehabilitation, to get the best life possible. Coming towards the end, next slide. Some other things we can look at. Prescription monitoring program. We're working on this. We're close to getting this in Pennsylvania. Every state around has this. This allows doctors, when somebody comes in, to see if their patients are getting medicines from other patients. This is huge. The studies have shown when doctors check this, they change their decision about their prescription over 40% of the time. Most of the time it's less, but sometimes it's actually to give more because they suspected somebody, now they find out they're doing okay. So it can work both ways. I had a doctor who worked in a state who was a pain physician, very responsible, ethical physician, and he started doing this, but he said he was just doing it on the fringe patients, the ones that he thought could be problems. And somebody said, why don't you just do one go-around with everybody in your practice? And he said, okay, I'll do it. And if he were to rate out of his top 10 patients in his practice, the absolute top guy, this professional guy, always on time, always polite, always paid every bill, would rate him the least likely to ever use. He checked him and found this guy was going to 5 to 7 other doctors for opioids, including him. So he learned a lesson there. Don't judge a book by its cover. Next slide. We want to educate parents and patients. I tell people, if you're going to have these medicines in your house, keep them safe. Keep them locked up. If you don't need them, throw it away. Treat it like it's a loaded gun. More people are dying from these in our community, from overdoses than from guns. And we got to educate health professionals more. The good news is more and more doctors are trying to learn more about this, but we still got a long way to go in the learning curve. Next slide. And just in conclusion, again, recovery is ongoing. Relapse happens, but if you fall down, as Dr. Twersky taught me, pick yourself up and keep going. Next slide. We need more studies on spiritual, psychosocial intervention. Next slide. Medicines can be helpful, but we got to know their risks, and we got to incorporate them. Next slide. And we have to keep open-minded. Next slide. And look, and this is kind of an expansion of the triangle. People always say, what's the answer? Well, the answer is, this is part of the answer. People from all walks of life getting together, collaborating, working as a team. Certainly more involvement with the legal profession and medical profession. That's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. I'm glad that you're having this. I mean, that's, you know, I forget the guy who says, why do you rob banks? He said, that's where the money is. If you want to know where people with addiction are, they're in our jails and prisons. That's, you know, if we want to try to help human lives, reduce costs, we're going to try to reach out to our fellow human beings suffering with a disease in that system. Next slide. I have 2 sons, 29, and my older son's a teacher at Thomas Jefferson High School. My younger son went to Allegheny College, and he majored in religion and philosophy, and I'm proud to say he was Phi Beta Kappa. He got a full scholarship to Vanderbilt and just got a master's in religion. He's planning to go on to get a PhD in philosophy and religion, and to be honest, I don't know what he's talking about half the time. But we discuss the Greek philosophy often, and I was glad to hear the father talking about it. Socrates, as you know, Socrates didn't write things down. His disciple Plato wrote it down, and his student Aristotle talked about it. But Socrates talked about the importance of us looking and really having close examination and doubt. You know, until we're getting 100% success with 100% of the patients, we have to look for better ways to do something. He says you have to admit your ignorance in order to come to knowledge, because no one is going to search for knowledge if they think they already have it. I think on a regular basis, and I challenge you and I challenge myself, think about, what am I doing? Could I be wrong about this? Could I be very wrong about that? Is there a better way? And that could be hard, but it's important not to be, if we don't do it because we're afraid we might be wrong, that's not good enough. I think it's important to do that. And we may find that we're right, but we have to keep asking these questions. Next slide. And I have a couple concluding slides. It's a terrible disease. I'm just going to go back. The first week of February of 2011 was a particularly hard week for me and other people. That was the week that the Steelers played the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl, and we lost, as you remember. But that has nothing to do with why that was a tough week. I ended up going to 3 funeral viewings that week. The first was a physician who had been my neighbor. His name was Mike, great guy, a few years older than I was. Died suddenly of a heart attack. Very untimely, very sad, many, many tears. The next two I went to were levels of pain well beyond that. There were two young men who died from their addiction. The first was Lucy's son, John. Lucy runs a treatment program in Monroeville. Great person, great heart. Her son, John, died of a heroin overdose, age 26. I went to the funeral viewing in Irwin, Pennsylvania, and I came up to her, and she was just sobbing inconsolably. I just held her. She just cried and says, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And I'm a psychiatrist, and I had struggled with what to say, and I just said, we're here for you, one day at a time. I'm proud to say Lucy has actually started a weekly support group for families who've lost family members from overdose. 2 days later, I went to another funeral viewing. I'm involved with a family support program in Beaver County. I've been for many years, and one of the people in the program, a lovely woman named Rosemary, her son Greg, had several years of good recovery, broke up with a girlfriend, became depressed, relapsed, and took his own life. And it was a closed casket. And I knew her son, and I was really struggling with this. And Rosemary's just a very upbeat, very spiritual person. And as I went up for condolences, she consoled me, to be honestly, more than I consoled her. And I stayed around. I knew a lot of the people. We talked I was there for about a half hour or so. And I had to give a talk in 2 days at a local high school, to a high school class on drug awareness. And as I was saying goodbye, she goes, "Oh, what do you got going on this week?" I said, "Actually, I have to go home, and in 2 days I have to give a talk to a bunch of students on the dangers of addiction." And she had put one hand on her son's coffin, who was her only child, and squeezed my other hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Try to do a good job." And it's important that we try to do a good job. Next slide, and this is my final slide. But there is hope. As my mentor, Dr. Tversky, said, recovery may not be a cure, but it can be a miracle. Let me just share one last story. A number of years ago, a guy named Dino was in our program, relapsed many times, was in jail many times. His mother worked with us, called me many times in tears. Pretty much everybody gave up on him. He finally came in. We were starting to use Suboxone on detox. He said, I'll give it a try. We actually used a variety of medicines. He left. He seemed to be doing okay, but I lost contact with him. Fast forward 19 months later, I had to give a talk up at Indiana in the summer to their addiction summer school, and I had an early talk, and I left early. I was going through back roads, and I was in Sarver, Pennsylvania, at a BP station. I went in 7:30 in the morning to, some of you may know where that is, to get a coffee. And here I see Dino coming at me, and when a patient comes at me saying, "Hey, doc," I'm a little cautious. I don't know if they're going to tell me they're doing great or ask me for $20, So he came up, gave me a hug, says, 19 months clean, I'm married, I'm going to programs, I'm working, and he says, I want you to meet Sophie. It was his daughter who was 9 weeks old. He said she was born premature, only weighed 2.5 to 3 pounds, and he says, and he held her up, and I've never seen a more beautiful little girl. and at that time she's probably still only about 9 pounds, even though she's like 9 weeks old. And he says, I just want to thank you and the people for my treatment, for saving my life, but more importantly, he says, Sophie wants to thank you because without all the help I received, she would have never been born. And as soon as he said that, she squeezed my finger and giggled, and I just kind of turned to mush, and I said, well, thanks, that's great. And I left there, and I'm driving down feeling good. Oh, we do, kind of, isn't that good how we kind of help people and do good work? And literally, not even a half a mile down the road, a truck kicked up a stone in the air, hit my windshield, put a Starburst crack in it, and I viewed that was a wake-up call from God to say, enough gloating, get back to work, So we do have we have people suffering, we have success. But it's important that we work together, and I really want to thank you. And the next slide is just my contact. If I can help you all in any way, please contact me. So thank you very much.